Mr. President, I come to the floor today to speak of the administration's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. In 1992, under President George H.W. Bush, the Senate unanimously approved a treaty to allow the United States to join the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Since then, we've been engaged in global conversation with nations around the world to tackle the challenges of climate change and ensure that we leave future generations a planet that is not plagued by catastrophic drought, famine, floods, wildfire, and a rise in the sea levels. After years of intense negotiation, the world finally reached an international agreement that resulted in a global commitment. 195 countries from around the world, except for 2, came together. Nicaragua abstained. They wanted a stronger agreement. And Syria was another country that stepped aside and didn't take part for obvious reasons. Representing more than 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions, these 195 countries committed to reducing their carbon emissions to prevent the average global temperature from rising by more than 2 degrees. I cannot fathom why any president of either political party would want to isolate the United States from the rest of the world, from our allies and trading partners, by leaving this agreement. President Trump justified this decision with concern for American jobs and American business. And yet, since the election, American business leaders have called him on the phone, sent a barrage of public letters, paid for full-page ads in newspapers, trying to get the message through to him in any way possible that American business strongly supports the Paris Agreement, which President Trump has walked away from. From tech companies to retailers, insurance companies, even energy companies like ExxonMobil and BP support global engagement on climate. In fact, the World Economic Forum estimated that the Paris Agreement represents a $23 trillion investment potential due to the growing demand in every corner of the world for clean energy. Between consumers who want clean energy and local regulations that require it, the demand for clean energy will continue to grow here in the United States and around the world. While pulling out of the Paris Agreement might seem like a way to protect jobs, for example, in the coal industry, the truth is that when these jobs do go away, it's mostly due to other things, market forces and automation. I've been down in the coal mines of southern Illinois, central Illinois, and I've seen the way they mine coal today. For those who've not been there or paid close attention, it may come as a surprise. It is largely automated. Massive machinery, known as continuous miners, literally chew away at the walls of coal, transporting it back up to the surface for transport. Back in the day when hundreds, if not thousands, of coal miners would head for their jobs with little more than a pick or an axe or a shovel or some drill, today it's an automated industry, and fewer jobs are creating more and more coal opportunities because automation is a big part. In addition, there's a change in the global energy market. Because of fracking in states like North Dakota, South Dakota, we've seen an increase in the availability of natural gas at lower prices. And last year, for the first time in modern history, we had more electricity generated in 1 month in America from natural gas sources than from coal sources. We've turned a corner when it comes to the availability of alternatives in energy. Between consumers who want access to clean energy and local regulations that require it, clean energy is going to continue to grow in demand. Meanwhile, even in my own home state of Illinois, which is the 4th largest coal-producing state in the nation, we already have thousands more workers in the solar industry than in the coal industry. Clean energy jobs are growing. Remaining engaged on climate change spurs new investment and strengthens American competitiveness for jobs in the future. These jobs include designing more efficient solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and manufacturing the components for export all over the world. Why should other nations get to lead this growing industry of clean energy and the United States step away? We can create those jobs right here in America. American jobs for American workers in clean energy opportunities. We should lead the world in the creation of clean energy jobs. This decision by the Trump administration to turn its back on this revolution in energy is going to cost us dearly. When the coal jobs do decline, we have responsibilities to retrain the workers for clean energy jobs and other opportunities in the future. The Paris Agreement ensured that we had credibility as leaders, access to global markets, and reduced financial risk for our citizens and businesses associated with changing climate. By walking away from the agreement, America is not just giving up an environmental commitment, but it's giving up economic opportunity. We've given away our leadership, isolated ourselves from the rest of the world. They're not going to wait for us. They're going to move forward and look for other leaders than the United States. This president talked about making America first. His decision to walk away from the Paris Agreement puts America dead last when it comes to energy in the 21st century. Climate change is a dire threat to the global economy and the global stability. It will cause catastrophic consequences for global health, food security, and habitat on land and in the ocean. My constituents in Illinois are already experiencing the adverse effects of changing climate. In recent years, our state, and I might add many others, have seen historic storms, floods, and droughts, causing millions of dollars in damage. Climate models suggest that if current global warming trends continue, Illinois will have a climate similar to the Texas Gulf Coast by the end of this century. For Illinois farmers, these changes to the environment have a direct effect on their livelihood, and for all of us, a direct impact on our food supply. Mr. President, climate change also has significant national security implications that affect our shores, the ones we simply can't ignore. The crisis in Syria, the flow of refugees from unstable parts of the world, is an early warning of the link to climate change and how humanitarian crises, particularly from less stable parts of our shared planet, are going to get worse if we continue to let climate change go unaddressed. Back in 2011, when pro-democracy protests began in Syria, many of those joining were displaced farmers who'd suffered 4 years of drought, made worse by the effects of climate change. The National Academy of Science published findings earlier this year showing that extreme drought in Syria between 2006 and 2009 was more likely due to climate change, and that the drought was a factor in the uprisings in 2011. Last year, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times columnist Tom Friedman wrote about massive migration out of parts of West Africa through the Sahara Desert to Libya, where people were hoping to eventually cross the dangerous trek across the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. He wrote, and I quote him, "Just as Syria's revolution was set off in part by the worst 4-year drought in the country's modern history, plus overpopulation, climate stress, and the internet, the same is true of this African migration wave." Former acting CIA Director Mike Morrell recently called President Trump's decision to pull the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement the worst decision made by this president so far. Mr. Morrell pointed out that pulling out not only cedes American leadership in the world, it harms our own national security by ignoring the impact of climate change on failed and fragile states that are homes to instability and violence. He further noted that we face 3 possible threats to our existence: nuclear war, a natural or man-made biological threat, or climate change. President Trump's dangerous decision, if not reversed, will contribute to that threat. Mr. President, anyone in this chamber claiming to be serious about national security simply cannot be credible without addressing the long-term threats posed by weak states and climate change in the decades to come. It's amazing to me that people around the world have come together to recognize the danger and the urgent need to act on climate change everywhere in the world except right here in the United States of America. I don't understand the other political party. I can remember a time when we would have a debate on climate change on the floor. We'd be talking about the Environmental Protection Agency, created by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. And we would have senators from both sides of the aisle actively debating climate change, realizing that it's a threat to our future. Those days have changed. Any debate now about environment is strictly one-sided. Well, has the science changed when it comes to global warming and climate change? Not at all. 98% of scientists agree that we have global warming, and the reasons for it relate directly to greenhouse gas emissions. So what has changed? Why isn't this a bipartisan debate anymore? The politics have changed. They've changed dramatically with the way we finance political campaigns in this country. Groups have emerged, one in particular, the Koch brothers, who've made their fortune in carbon industries, who have promised any Republican who steps out of line on climate change, you're in for a fight. You're going to face a primary. Don't you dare stand up and talk about climate change here on the floor of the United States Senate. And that's where we are today. We've come to a standstill, and now we have a president who has decided to walk away from this issue. This president has chosen politics over science and greed over responsibility. His decision is a fateful decision for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. There may be some momentary applause in some places because President Trump has walked away from this global agreement to deal with this global challenge. But I can tell you the cheers are short-lived. When we see the price that we're going to pay, and our kids will pay, for this gross irresponsibility, there won't be a lot of cheering. The United States, I've said this on the floor before, and I'll say it again because I'm waiting for someone on the other side to come and challenge it. The Republican Party of the United States of America is the only major political party in the world today that refuses to take climate change seriously. I've said that over and over, and I expect senators from the Republican side to come to the floor and say, that's not true. We take it seriously, but they don't. Or to come to the floor and say, no, there's another major political party that also denies climate change. One Republican senator, after I said this on the floor repeatedly, pulled me off to the side in the corner, looked around, whispered, there's a party in Australia that also doesn't believe in climate change. And you think to yourself, so it's come to that. We have isolated ourselves in the eyes of the world when it comes to protecting this world for generations to come. We're going to pay a heavy price for that, but the biggest price is going to be paid by future generations. Can we make a little sacrifice today? Drive more energy-efficient cars and trucks? Think about ways to heat our homes, to light up our rooms that don't consume so much energy? Well, of course we can. We've already done it, and we can do so much more. Walking away from the Paris Agreement is not the path that should lead America into the 21st century.